Hypnosis is interesting because we tend to talk about the kind of three spheres of like manipulation and influence. Hypnosis is being able to describe things. A lot of times people call that a trance. If you can describe whatever their experience they're in, chances are whenever you make your pitch, they're gonna be more likely to take action on it. Not everybody is hypnotizable, but generally speaking, the people who are more hypnotizable are the people who have this very rich inner world. It puts you into kind of this dreamlike state where you can play around with ideas in a way where there's less resistance. Hypnosis takes the two stages of neuroplasticity and puts them together. If you take somebody to particular emotional states, they're more likely to behave in a particular way.
You're listening to Manipulation Games Psychology and Marketing Podcast with your hosts, Gene and Darren.
Welcome to Manipulation Games Psychology and Marketing Podcast. I'm Darren with our marketing genius, Gene. How are you? And we got a great episode today. What are we going to talk about today?
We're talking about hypnosis.
Ooh, hypnosis. I love it because hypnosis is kind of spooky. It's one of those spooky things that is like kind of puts people under the spell, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely spooky. It's definitely, a lot of ways, it's considered in some ways supernatural. And I think what we're going to try to do today is demystify it a little bit.
Okay.
And maybe actually take away some of the supernatural stuff of it to make people understand how accessible it is as a form of powerful communication.
Oh.
Right. And for people who want to communicate powerfully and have like influence on their audience emotionally, understanding this phenomenon that a lot of times we go through the world and we are hypnotized by different things. And you've probably in some ways have had either hypnosis or hypnosis-like experiences at some point in your life. And if you start to understand kind of how it works, you become to realize it's actually a very normal thing, you know, this kind of state of like high absorption.
Yeah, now that you mention it, I'm sure there's moments where I have been hypnotized by like commercials or stories or things on social media or like on TikTok, like watching some short reels and not even realizing what's happening to me. Maybe I'm in a hypnotic state and I don't even realize it.
If you use the broadest definition of hypnosis, right, watching a movie that causes you to become fully absorbed could be considered something that's hypnotic, right?
Yeah.
Something that takes you into a particular emotional state. And a lot of like what hypnosis focuses on as a form of communication is leading people to a particular emotional state.
Now, leading people to an emotional state is fairly important and relevant to marketing, as we discussed earlier in our previous podcast, because people make decisions based off of their emotions. And the thing that I always remember is when you told me about that experiment where people who have lost their emotions through like getting a hit on the head, having some sort of part of their brain damaged, they're no longer able to make any decisions at all. Like simple decisions like what color of shirt to buy or like what to order from a fast food restaurant because their emotional section of their brain was damaged.
Yeah. So emotions are a very important part of our decision-making process. And when that damage happens, it like the simplest decisions become impossible. And that seems to indicate that the vast majority of the time we are making our decisions very quickly based on the different emotional associations we have with things. And then afterwards, to sort of double check it with logic, right? Like, you decide you want that sandwich. And then afterwards, like, can I have that sandwich today? It's like, is that a good idea from whatever, my dietary goals or whatever
Or you
it is?
justify it afterwards.
Yeah, you justify it afterwards, right? And so a lot of our decisions are happening really, really fast based on these emotional associations.
So hypnosis is almost kind of like a hack, a mind hack.
It can be. It can be a mind hack where it allows us to kind of access some of these things. And so hypnosis is interesting because, on this podcast, we tend to talk about the kind of three spheres of like manipulation and influence where like, the first sphere is just the ability to manipulate yourself, to influence yourself, right?
Yes.
So hypnosis touches that, right? It also touches the ability, if you learn how to be able to use kind of hypnotic language patterns, you can also be able to influence other people and help them shift their state. And of course, if you're able to take these language patterns and amplify them on a mass level in terms of some sort of media campaign, right? Now you're taking it to the level of mass influence.
Yeah.
And hypnosis, a lot of times, I think when people hear it they think it's like, again, this crazy supernatural thing. But I think once we break it down, you become realize that like it's actually a very simple thing.
It is. Yeah, I think you briefly described it, and we're going to talk more about what it is, really. Yeah. But it's not really that complicated, because we have all these micro emotions that we go through every single day, and we make all these decisions, right? But we don't necessarily understand why we make those decisions. And you're saying there's a very simple mechanism, right, in which we make these choices in our lives. And hypnosis is kind of one of those things where I think people have just figured out this is how the human mind works. This is how our consciousness works.
Yeah.
And we can use this to either help ourselves or convince other people to do stuff like for marketing purposes, or even hypnotize the masses.
Hypnotize the masses, yeah. All right. So I think a good way to start taking this and making it accessible is to look at it from two perspectives, right? Mm-hmm. So one perspective is from the perspective of the hypnotizer. If you're somebody who is trying to do hypnosis, right? What you're essentially doing, you're communicating with vivid description in such a way as to steer their imagination onto kind of like a sensory journey where they end up being led into a particular emotional state. Right. So when, like, for example, if somebody is coming into a hypnotherapy situation, or if it's a stage hypnosis type of thing, part of the aspect of the hypnotic communicator, what they're doing is they're describing sensations to you, describing an experience to you. And if somebody has a very rich inner world, just listening to that experience, they start to kind of go through that process and potentially be able to be led to a particular state. Right.
Wow. So you're saying that basically just simply describing.
I mean, really, at the end of the day, hypnosis is being able to describe things well.
Wow, really? That's a very basic of it.
The very, very, very basic aspect of it. It's being able to describe things well. If you're describing to somebody the feeling of like a wave of relaxation flowing from the top of their head all the way down to their toes, and that with every breath they take, they slowly start to begin to feel the tension of the day melt away out of their muscles. And they begin to feel how heavy their feet feel on the ground. And their eyelids start to droop. Like you start describing these things. It's hard not to imagine things when somebody describes them to you, because that's the way we kind of do the world. If you tell somebody to imagine a red car, generally speaking, they'll start imagining a red car in their head, right? And not everybody is hypnotizable, but generally speaking, the people who are more hypnotizable are the people who have this very rich inner world, where when you do a good job of describing an experience in a very like structured way, people will go on this journey, right? And you can lead them to this kind of this end state, right?
Yeah, I've always seen like those hypnosis kind of demonstrations. They usually, the hypnotist will pick out, one out of every like 5 or 10 people who is susceptible. He'll do some initial thing, and he'll find somebody in the audience who is, impacted the most, I guess, under the initial spell of words. They'll bring him on stage and do a whole demonstration, and they'll just follow everything that he tells them. Which is wild.
It is. Yeah, they do like a thing where like there's various things like the arm float test, where if somebody's doing it for an entertainment purposes and they're a stage hypnotist, they'll do something where they're essentially testing the entire audience to see who is more kind of susceptible. Again, who is able to take the descriptions that the hypnotist is putting out and be able to materialize them into like their own experience, like the feeling of your hand floating up. Right. Yeah. For some people, they'll experience that more than others, again, because they might have a richer imagination or a kind of imagination experience.
Yeah.
Now, from the perspective of somebody who is being hypnotized, right? It's, again, that ability to take the descriptions that are coming in and be able to vividly kind of imagine it and experience it as they're happening. Like if somebody's describing your feet getting really, really heavy, you can actually feel your feet getting really, really heavy, right? Obviously, you can, if you wanted to resist it, you could resist it. But like, if there's no reason for you to resist imagining that sensation, you'd be like, oh, you kind of go along with it. And the deeper part of it is that you can go into this state of this deep absorption, as to describe it. A lot of times people call that a trance, which is this state of, it's a high focus state, but highly relaxed. And what the kind of the cool thing about trance is, and why a lot of times it's used in things like hypnotherapy, is that it puts you into kind of this dreamlike state where you can play around with ideas and with emotional associations in a way where there's less resistance, and you could potentially rewire the way you associate emotions to certain topics.
Wow.
Right.
So this is kind of where hypnotherapy comes
Exactly.
into play. You can actually rewire your kind of thought process.
It allows you to be playful with ideas. So a lot of times, for example, if you say take somebody who, let's say, experiences like crippling social anxiety, and you just tell them, like, in a normal situation, you tell them like imagine you just like marching into a party and like talking to everybody and like being like really like, you know, like socially successful. Chances are, initially their mind's gonna be like, wait, that's like, they start imagining it and like, no, I am not worthy, I am not good. Like all the negative self-talk that they might have built up over time is there, and that the resistance builds up, right? What can happen is that if you are able to take somebody into kind of like a hypnotic trance in a therapy situation, is that allows them to be in this place where they kind of feel safe, they're not really judging their thoughts, and they could start imagining certain experiences without potentially the negative emotional charge. Like starting a conversation with a stranger might have a very intense emotional charge for somebody with intense social anxiety, but then you could start maybe familiarizing them with that experience where they actually might start feeling good about, right? It's very hard to fight emotion with logic, but you can fight emotion with emotion.
I see.
Right. So, for example, if somebody feels fear about talking to somebody, you might be able to try to rewire the associations of talking to a stranger with an intense sense of curiosity. What is this person's story? Where are they coming from? What's their life, right? And you can kind of overtake potentially this fear, this anxiety with some other emotion and have a stronger association with it, right?
Yeah. Like emotions, one thing I've learned is that, again, the emotional part of the brain is different from the logical part of the brain. And people who are feeling emotions, you can't reason with them.
It's hard.
It's hard. It's really hard because they're not thinking in the same part of the brain that you're thinking. You might be thinking here, but they are thinking back here. And so what you're saying is that, you know, you need to communicate with emotions to get in touch with these people.
Yeah. And so in the trance state, if from the perspective of somebody who's being hypnotized, and if you go into, again, a therapeutic trance state, it gives you a little bit of a playground to mess around with the associations that you might have with certain things in a way that are more useful to you. For example, like you could start enjoying salads more often if you're trying to become healthier from like a weight loss standpoint. Or you might really not, like some people really don't like working out, but you might start try to build more positive associations with the idea of working out. So all of a sudden, the lasting effects that come out of like a therapeutic situation is the fact that you're not having new associations. And as we know, emotional associations steer our behavior over time.
That makes so much sense. That's so practical. Like I could just imagine myself if I go to a therapist and say, hey, I want to, eat more salads and eat a healthy diet. Then they can associate all these happy emotions with eating salads. It could literally just be images. It could be just someone describing, hey, you're eating a salad right now and you're really smiling. So in my head, I'm just thinking about, salad and people smiling and just having a good time and being healthy. But then every time I see a salad, subconsciously, that stuff is just going to pop in my head, right?
Right. You're starting to sort of shift kind of your emotional association. Because again, most of the things that drive our day-to-day behavior is the kind of the positive or negative emotions we have with something. For example, every day we oftentimes we intersect and we congregate in the kitchen for the coffee time, right? And one is like we probably all enjoy the taste of coffee. So it's probably one of the first things I'm excited about at the beginning of the morning, right?
Positive.
Then oftentimes we all run into each other and we start like talking about like, hey, what happened this weekend, whatever it is.
Right.
So that thing that we're doing now is being reinforced by all those associations that have been built around it.
Got it.
Right. On the other hand, like for example, if you all of a sudden start having really bad associations, like for some reason every time you went down there to get coffee if people start yelling at you, you might have to shift your experience with that thing, right?
Yeah.
And so from the standpoint of what hypnosis does, right? Hypnosis cannot control behavior, but hypnosis can shift a person's emotional state into a state where they're more likely to partake in a behavior.
Yeah.
So, for example, you cannot make somebody cluck like a chicken.
Yeah.
Right. But what like a stage hypnotist does is they take people and they help them get into a state of being uninhibited and fun and relaxed.
Got it.
Where they're more likely to be like cool with like doing ridiculous things and having fun and enjoying the party.
Yeah.
Right. And that way, that's how you can get the behavior out of people. At any moment in time, they could tell themselves like, no, I don't want to do this, right? But if you can lead a person into a state of like, oh, this is fun, this is interesting. Yeah, I'll go along with this.
Yeah.
That's what leads to the behavior.
Interesting. So it's not as really scary as we imagine hypnosis.
I don't think so.
Yeah,
And
it doesn't seem like it at all.
there's still so many mysteries about it. Scientists are constantly trying to run studies and trying to figure out ways of like how do you define it. People do like brain imaging, try to figure out like what is a trance, and like again, trance for whatever reason, it's a high state of relaxation, but while maintaining a high focus. Usually, when you're relaxed, you're actually unfocused, and when you're stressed out, you're focused. But here, it's like the two things were switched, and so it's not as scary if you think about it purely as the ability for somebody to describe experiences, and then for somebody the ability to listen to those experiences being described and actually go through that journey.
I feel like, like hypnotherapists, for example, there's some weird stigma about, going to see a therapist to hypnotize you. To me, it's not like that at all. I feel like that almost makes me want to go maybe see a hypnotherapist, because all they're doing is just associating certain emotions with certain behaviors.
Yeah.
So that you actually want to change for yourself. And it's just a method. It's a method to change your behavior by just hacking into your natural, I guess, function, your subconscious and your consciousness, and just to make those connections where you will make a change and maybe go work out more, or, associate working out with a positive attitude or emotions.
Yeah, I mean, really, they're mostly in a hypnotherapy session, they're just taking you to a highly relaxed state. Basically, it's almost like it's a guided meditation.
Okay.
Really, like that's one way to think about it. So it's like if you ever like do shavasana at the end of your yoga.
Yeah, of course.
Then, it's just like you're super relaxed, right? And then in this state, you have like less judgment and less resistance to play around with ideas and potentially find solutions to things, find new ways of thinking about things, find new things to focus on.
Yeah, meditation is so trendy now. But now that you bring it up, it's like, I guess hypnotherapists were kind of a little bit ahead of their time. Because that's essentially what they're doing, is putting you in a state of like relaxed meditation, and then just kind of just suggesting, things to reinforce behaviors that you want to change.
Yeah, things to consider, ways about thinking about the world. So the first thing we can have as a takeaway from understanding hypnosis as it's a way of communicating in a very descriptive way that takes people on a journey. And then if you take somebody to particular emotional states, they're more likely to behave in a particular way. So the first takeaway is that whenever you're communicating, is always communicate with an emotional end state in mind.
Oh, end state.
Right. So basically, if you're communicating to a person with some sort of goal, right, have that emotional end state in mind of where you want them to go. And this doesn't necessarily have to be like through hypnosis or communication. It's just understanding that, it reminds me of this like thing, like when the high school cliche, like the guy who takes the girl on that date to the horror movie, right? Because the horror movie causes like adrenaline spikes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then it's hard to know, like, is the adrenaline spike associated with the movie? Or is it associated with this guy that I'm with, right?
Oh.
Or like, you can have these things, like, if you go on a date to a roller coaster park, right? All of a sudden, you have this heightened, like, excited state, right? Is it the roller coaster, or is it the person I'm with?
Yeah.
It's like the emotional end state. Like if you want somebody to feel excited around you,
right? Right.
or to like you, create the emotional state.
Got it.
Where then they're like, oh, maybe I like this person.
Yeah. So then every time like that person shows up, if you have like a coworker who's going to be always excited around you, and then he leaves you in a very happy state after every conversation, you're going to want to hang around with that guy because you're going to subconsciously just gravitate towards that person. Like, oh, that guy's happy. He makes me happy. So you're saying we can actually do that and actually have conversations or talk to people with the intent of leaving them in a certain state that will influence.
Yeah. So one way to get them to that kind of happy state is obviously just to have like fun conversations and you know and like laugh around or whatever it is. But at some point, you can also do things like, for example, you can have conversations about certain things. Like, you know, one common thing we can talk about, it's like if you want somebody to be kind of an excited state, it's like, do you know that experience? You know, like when you're on a roller coaster and you feel the roller coaster, it's like clinking up to the top of the hill, right? So by describing certain things or maybe taking them back to certain experiences they've had through the conversation, you allow them to like access that thing.
That's crazy.
Right. Or like, you know, have you ever been like out with all your friends, like at like a nightclub, and you guys are partying and you're having so much fun and you're just jumping around and you're being wild, right? And you're just like looking around at all your friends and you're like, I would rather not be anywhere but here. This is the greatest place to be, right?
Yeah.
So just describing and talking about that experience, right, in the situation kind of takes you to that place.
Wow.
And now all of a sudden, our interaction right now is now going to be a little bit tinged by the fact that you just took a mental journey to this other place.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah. That's wild. You could have intent to actually just describe some happy place. Like, for example, before we started the show, we played that Daft Punk song One More Time. That always puts me in a happy place. So every time I listen to that song, I get pumped up. I'm like, you know, one more time. You know?
Yeah.
But just even like bringing up a song, right, that gets someone like amped up. Like, oh, I love that one Katy Perry song. Like, you know,
having those associations. Yeah.
You know, just by having those associations, other people, you're gonna put them in that space where they're gonna have a positive kind of association with you.
Yeah. You take them someplace, right? And so, obviously, there is. I guess a formal discipline of hypnotic language just sort of developed over time, certain techniques and certain ways of speaking, right? For example, if you're doing a formal trance situation with a hypnotherapist, there's all this stuff where they talk about, you know, breathing, and there's like a countdown from like 10 to 1. Like they try to get you to imagine like walking, you know, down a staircase as you go deeper and deeper into trance. But in most normal conversation, obviously, you're probably not going to be doing these kinds of things, right? But simply the act of being more descriptive in your language when it comes to things that you want people to experience can, you know, create a much bigger impact in your conversations with them. You know, so like, you know, if you're talking about like going out to a nightclub and having a party and having an amazing time with your friends, you know, times that you look back on all the time, you know, describing that in slightly more detail, going into the detail, like, oh, the champagne was spraying around, and you know, we were yelling so hard because like we couldn't hear ourselves over the music. Yeah, that takes you to that place. Yeah, right. That takes you back to that experience. And so, just this highly descriptive language, can be a takeaway from our understanding of how hypnosis works.
Interesting, because even when you said that, you know, even though, you know, we didn't ever go to any sort of like club or anything, I'm thinking, oh, the times when I went to like, you know, festivals or something, hearing the crowd cheer and roar, you know, the feeling of being with, you know, going to a music concert and listening to your favorite band, you know, and seeing and all the people just kind of sing in unison and cheering, you know, you're putting people in that state, you know, of mind, like, wow, yeah, I remember that too. You know, I went through the same emotions. But again, it puts you in a place that you associate a positive kind of state, right?
Right. And simply, again, because we're here right now, you being in that state now is associated with this specific conversation, potentially with me as the person in this conversation, right? And so you're able to, like when you're talking to people and you're able to take them on these experiences through descriptive language, and you're keeping them like a very positive, exciting experiences, with time, you're going to become more and more associated with positive and exciting experiences in interactions in those people's minds.
Wow. Okay, so how can we tie this into marketing? Because to me, it seems very obvious, right?
Well, it is. Honestly, it's in some ways it's already tied into that one of those axioms we talk about a lot. If you can describe somebody's problem to them better than they can, they automatically and unconsciously assume you are the solution.
Oh, okay.
I think we know that axiom works because we use it all the time in advertising, right? But if you're describing somebody's problem with them and you're taking them to that place through your description by telling them the story of their life, of whatever their ailment is, like they want to get healthier so they can run around and hang out with their grandkids, right? So they want to get into better shape, they want to have more mobility, they want to be more active, that kind of thing. If you can describe whatever their experience they're in, chances are whenever you make your pitch to them for whatever the solution is, they're going to be more likely to take action on it because the pain point is a little bit closer to them.
I see. So again, marketing with that intent to leave that person that you're communicating with through your marketing.
Yeah, so that might be like more of like a negative association you're connecting with, right? Because you can have a positive association of something you're heading towards, and you can have a negative association of something you're trying to get away from.
I see. Oh, to like escape.
Well, yeah, because like you want to take action, you want to be motivated to take action.
Got it.
I remember in the copywriting episode, we were talking about the guys who were writing copy for the women's weight loss thing, and they were describing the situation where she was worried about her husband spending too much time at work, and there's that secretary who's like hot from college or whatever it is, and the wife is worried that if she doesn't like lose weight and get attractive to her husband again, right?
Putting them in a state of anxiety then, right?
Well, yeah, because you're telling a story, you're creating a kind of descriptive situation, and then you have the positive thing of potentially imagining of how good your Instagram photos will look next time you and your husband are going on vacation. Both of you are now fit and you're looking beautiful.
Yeah.
And how jealous all your friends are that you're on Mykonos and you're looking tan and hot and lean and beautiful and whatever it is, right? So again, you're using description to create these worlds, and then potentially shift somebody's behavior based on how they're associating with these.
That's such worlds. A good example. I love the whole the one where you make someone anxious. You're just describing a situation. It's almost like a movie or something where you're like, you find your husband in bed with another lover or something, and then just describing that scenario that leads up to that moment. People who have that kind of anxious anxiety already in their relationship will probably feel that and they'll tense up.
Well, yeah, because you are a lot of times people already have like irrational fears. Like a lot of times they're probably delusional, irrational fears that are just bouncing around in their head. And if you are somebody who is able to bring voice to those, then all of a sudden they're like, oh, this person probably understands where I'm coming from, and this might be might be the solution.
I loved how you said you put the voice to the anxiety,
the irrational
fears that they already have in their heads,
right?
Or it doesn't have to be fears. It could just be like the other example of being on vacation, the sense of like, oh, I'm gonna look so beautiful, I'm gonna be so admired. I think that's what a lot of fashion brands do a lot, right?
Yeah,
is a lot of women, they want to feel like if they buy that dress, that when they go to a cocktail party, everyone's gonna look at them.
Yeah.
That's not really it's not reality, but that's the feeling that you kind of want to sell them, right?
Yeah. Well, actually, talking about branding, there's something I wanted to jump into at one point in this conversation where, as I was thinking about this episode, so one of the things that, for example, hypnosis is used for is to deal with, in a hypnotherapy setting, is to deal with like bad habits.
Yeah.
Like smoking.
Yeah.
Right.
That's huge.
And so the way that would generally look, go through a hypnotherapy situation, you go to that trance, that playground where you're sort of playing around with ideas, and you might start creating negative emotional associations with the act of smoking.
Okay.
Right. Like a sense of disgust, like, oh, on that thing, to potentially then you have these new associations and your behavior gets shifted by that. What was kind of interesting to me is I was thinking about, like, we work in advertising, right? And advertising spent the vast majority of last century branding smoking as a sexy, cool thing.
Yes.
Right? Now, in that sense, you might start thinking about branding as a very long-term, slow hypnosis because it's wiring associations. It's spent decades associating smoking with things that are cool, with badass characters. Right. In my mind, I'm starting to think about like Tyler Durden. I'm starting to think about like rock stars, those like film noir detectives, wisping smoke, all that stuff. So they built those associations over time. Yeah. And now I think we're getting out of that because, again, people are realizing smoking is bad, and there's been many, many campaigns trying to actually reverse that process that was built by the advertisers.
That's what I was going to say is now it's like reverse. Now smoking is associated with like cancer and like all these negative, horrible, awful things.
But it took time, right?
Yeah.
Like 10, 20 years ago, it'd be hard to imagine. Like 10, 20 years ago, like I couldn't think of like imagining a cool character who wasn't like smoking, right?
Right.
Or cigarettes after sex, or all these like associations. Yeah. So the branding itself wasn't using like hypnotic language to do it per se. They were just doing the associations, right? To build out this thing. Kind of similarly, remember we were talking about how if you go to Red Bull's Instagram, there's not a single instance of the Red Bull like can anywhere on the Instagram. Yeah. It's just association with adventure. Yeah, they're just connecting like people with the Red Bull logo doing crazy things like poor guys jumping out of space and like, parachuting from space and these kinds of crazy adventures, right? So the reason I was thinking about it is, advertising in the form of branding, creating these associations, right, can be potentially considered a form of like this kind of rewiring associations thing, right?
Yeah.
And maybe one of the ways some people are now trying to get out of that is by going to hypnotherapy and trying to unwork that. So decades was spent by, immoral like cigarette companies trying to convince people this is cool. And now for people to potentially who are having issues stopping smoking, they now need to find ways of rewiring the associations of the act of smoking with things that are now negative and disgusting, so they can now push themselves away from that behavior.
Yeah, I mean that's hilarious because it's like you're a person who smokes, you're hypnotized through this long form of marketing, and so your brain is wired a certain way to associate smoking with all these positive aspects, right?
Yeah.
But you're saying to kind of reverse that, you almost have to see a hypnotist to kind of reassociate or rewire those associations.
Well, hypnotherapy allows us to potentially do that, the rewiring of the associations faster.
Got it. I see.
Right. It can still happen long form. Like again, there's all these like campaigns that are being done by nonprofits. Like I think Truth is one of them. Like the anti-cigarette campaigns, and so they're definitely doing effective work. But it's the same amount of time it took to generate those associations and that branding by the cigarette companies over those decades is probably going to take a similar amount of time,
right,
to reverse it through like counter branding, with the anti-smoking campaigns, right?
Just organically.
But hypnosis and hypnotherapy allows you to go into that kind of playground of where you could potentially rewire your brain. Andrew Huberman, the neuroscientist, I like the way he kind of talks about hypnosis, where he and Dr. Spiegel, who's on his podcast, talked about how hypnosis takes the two stages of neuroplasticity and puts them together. So normally the way neuroplasticity, or the way your brain is reforming itself, requires a learning stage and a rewiring stage. So you practice something during the day and then you go to sleep and the rewiring happens while you sleep. So it's a two-stage process. But hypnosis at some level allows you to both do learning and rewiring at the same time, because hypnosis very much is a dreamlike state. It's almost, you're almost in like you're almost like in REM state when you're at, because you're super relaxed, but you're still like aware enough and focused enough to be imagining things and playing around with ideas in your mind and exploring different visualizations and different fantasies in a kind of a safe environment, and potentially try to rewire how you experience things.
That's fascinating, because I totally understand what you mean by about rewiring after you go to like sleep, right? You know, if you ever like try to learn a musical instrument, you'll struggle during the day trying to learn something. And then when you wake up the next day, it's all of a sudden it's like you feel like you've learned it. It's a lot easier. But the fact that you can actually rewire your brain in this hypnotic state, which is like a REM kind of sleep.
Yeah.
You're just taking a shortcut into like changing habits or learning something completely new just really quickly. That's incredibly powerful.
Yeah. So again, like we learn a lot faster when we're in a slightly more relaxed state. Mm-hmm. Whenever we're talking about kind of accelerated learning, that kind of thing. That
makes me want to actually see a hypnotherapist.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you don't necessarily have to see a hypnotherapist. Just exploring the different kinds of like hypnotic tapes that are out there on YouTube. There's plenty of them for all kinds of different topics, like becoming more productive, feeling more confident. Just explore them, find ones that feel or work for you. Like if it shifts your emotional state and gives you some sort of like benefit, you'll probably know pretty quickly.
So, how do you then like help yourself? How do you hypnotize yourself? Is there a way to do that?
I mean, there's definitely people who can like hypnotize themselves, but I think it's a lot easier just to use the self-hypnosis tapes.
Okay.
Just find ones that like there's, a lot of them out there for whatever the thing you're working on. And then potentially if there's something that isn't out there specifically for you, then you might want to see a hypnotherapist who might help structure something that's specifically for you. Like a lot of things that have to do with fears. A lot of times, like, if one of the ways you get over fear traditionally is like exposure therapy, right? You slowly expose yourself to the thing. You can't go too far because otherwise the fear gets reinforced, but you slowly get more used to being around, I don't know, a snake or something.
Yeah.
Like not a scary snake, a cute, something, right? But you can also potentially do that in the playground that's formed by that trance state.
Okay.
Right? Or traumas, right? Trauma is a time loop that people get stuck in. It's an experience that they have and they're looping it over and over in their brain. I remember I learned this when I was, strangely enough, in a literature class where we were studying World War I literature about soldiers coming back from World War I with shell shock, what they were calling PTSD.
Yeah.
And trauma, a big portion of it is your loss of the progression of time. It's like coming out of like, I don't know, have you ever had a situation where you have an argument with somebody and then you come out of the argument and you can't stop playing it over and over in your head?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's like a mini version of a trauma. A very, very, very serious trauma for somebody is that time loop, but it never goes away.
Oh, that's awful.
Right.
Yeah.
And so in some ways you got to find ways of breaking out of that thing. And potentially some of the ways that people do it is they try to go through and relive that experience through some sort of therapeutic session and come to terms with it in a new way to take out the emotional charge of it. Because the emotional charge is the thing that makes it become something that your brain can't process and you're just running it over and over in your head. And so the trance potentially creates the situation of a playground where you can maybe face that trauma and reframe it in some new way that allows you to break out of that time loop.
Yeah, it's a loop. You just have to break out of it. I think we all can relate to that.
Yeah.
When we can't sleep at night because we're reliving a conversation we had earlier, like through a fight or something, and it's hard to sleep. It's
hard to sleep because it's the stronger the emotional charge of whatever that event is, like the longer you'll keep.
Wow.
And then normally, like, eventually you process it, you come to terms with it, and then it goes away. But like in the very extreme cases, in extreme trauma, the time loop never goes away.
Man,
it just keeps coming back. That fear, it comes back in your nightmares. Like soldiers coming back from war and PTSD. It just keeps coming back, and somehow you need to dissipate that emotional charge that surrounded that thing in a way that allows you now finally to process it and move on.
Man,
and there's a lot of different ways going about it, but some people find help in hypnotherapy situations where they're able to face whatever the crazy events happen to them, and again try to reframe them in a new way and maybe build new associations around the event.
Yeah, I think that's such a good thing to actually just recognize first, the fact that, people out there listening or watching, you might be able to recognize maybe you're in an emotional kind of state of mind where it's just looping. It's like a constant loop, and it's probably, affecting your life in a lot of negative ways because you're not able to break free from that. And the PTSD is a good example, an extreme example of it. Like soldiers who witness awful, terrible things, and it's constantly replaying in their heads. Just to be able to recognize that and seek out help to break out of that feedback loop
and regain time. A lot of times, like, that's why I think people who especially go through like PTSD or those kinds of experiences, they find a great relief in picking up some sort of activity like painting or music, something that basically forces them into the present moment and therefore out of the time loop.
Got it. They're not present.
Well, it's just like, again, you want to try to return the normal perception of time.
Yeah.
As opposed to being kind of stuck in the time loop. And things like hypnotherapy, and there's a lot of other ways that people are kind of going about it. Recently, there's been a lot of work on psychedelics potentially helping people break out of these like traumatic time loops. It's difficult to fight emotion with logic, but you can potentially fight emotion with other emotion.
Got it.
Right.
Yeah.
Again, replacing fear with curiosity. Be taking something that might have hurt you, but reframing it as something now that it made you stronger. Right. There's like it's a subtle shift, but there's ways of, again, rebuilding the associations around something in a way that, okay, you've been hurt by something, but this thing has now made you stronger.
Or
and accepting that idea on a deeper level.
I feel like people have been abused, right? They're probably in a constant loop where they're reliving the abuse that they've had,
right?
And the only way to get out of that maybe is maybe associating it with just being angry and wanting to make a change, to get out of that, that state of mind. And stop being a victim, for example.
Well, yeah, especially, I mean, if there's abuse, right? A lot of it, the terrible thing about things like abuse, right, is that we're talking here about emotional associations that are built, right? So, for example, there's like a sexual abuse situation, right? All of a sudden, something that in a lot of sense should be a beautiful thing, like a normal sexual experience, has now been tarnished, and has incredibly negative associations with it, which then a person in the future going into potentially a healthy relationship with somebody in the future, it makes it very difficult to have a normal sexual experience, right?
That's a good
because
example.
Now you have all these like bad associations with, and so finding ways of now again rewiring the associations and like removing this negative thing that's basically ruined it. And start building new positive associations with the thing. That's actually would be what it would mean to move past the trauma. So once you now, the positive associations are now more powerful than the negative associations that you've had.
So you have to replace all that negative experiences.
Or you have to find ways of trying to do that. And it's not easy, right?
Yeah, I'm sure it's not.
Well, because the stronger an emotion is, the more solidified a thing is. That's how like phobias happen. Like, you get attacked by a dog when you're a kid and it's an incredibly terrifying thing. All of a sudden you're going to have this very powerful negative association with dogs.
Wow.
Right. And it takes probably an equally strong positive emotion over time to overtake the negative emotion that's been associated with that.
So I think that the thing that we all have to kind of like understand and recognize is that we have all these emotions associated from past experiences and past traumas, and we have to break out of these harmful loops. And hypnosis is a very effective, probably powerful way to do that.
It's a powerful way to do it. Obviously, there's a lot of different ways to go about it, and you find whatever it is. But hypnosis basically tells us, it makes us aware of the fact that a lot of things are being run on these associations. And so again, if you're looking at hypnosis from the point of view of the hypnotizer, it's a way of communicating with people in a way where you're able to lead them on a journey to an emotional state. If you're looking from the perspective of somebody who is being hypnotized or wants to be hypnotized, you become aware that, okay, you're having all these things happening in your mind, and by going into like a hypnosis situation, you're trying to find ways of rewiring the different associations you have with certain things. Very commonly, like I said, social anxiety, right? Social anxiety is a delusion.
Okay.
Right? It's a delusion because chances are most people are not thinking about you that much, right? So it's like a negative. It's a delusion that's holding you back, right?
Got it.
And potentially replacing that delusion with a new delusion that people do want to hear from you and do want to talk to you would be a positive counter delusion to try to bring into your world that can open up, can open up your life, allow you to partake in new behaviors, because you were being held back by this delusion that people, wouldn't like you, that you're not worthy.
Yeah.
And very likely you are worthy, right? It's just, because, but for some reason we have like the distance between the association of, people not liking you and your sense of self is a little closer than the distance between people liking you and your sense of self. And you need to shift that association with time. Similarly, like you see this a lot, I think, with girls and body image. Mm-hmm. You have girls who are absolutely beautiful. There's like absolutely nothing wrong with them, but for whatever reason, they've started building associations in their mind. And when they look at themselves in the mirror, they're experiencing body dysmorphia and they're not seeing reality for what it is.
That's a great example too.
Right.
If a beautiful woman who walks in, and most of the people think she's beautiful, but if she doesn't, that's something that's an awful negative delusion.
It's a negative delusion. Like maybe she has like a tiny little scar on her chin, and now she hyper focuses on the scar, and she thinks like she's disfigured. So you have now this delusion that's holding a person back, and thinking about that delusion and trying to shift it potentially into a different delusion, more of a positive delusion, can be a very useful tool. Because regardless, in some way, we're going to be delusional, right? Like again, like we our perception of reality is very rarely fully accurate.
Yeah.
And being able to counter that is one of the powerful things. Using description to go into these these visualizations and these fantasies, this playground of ideas, we can sort of start rethinking about ideas. Like, okay, it's not the scar on my chin, but I have really beautiful eyes or something, right? Mm-hmm. All of a sudden you're shifting the focus, and again, you're kind of rewiring the associations, and that might now for a girl might have that negative delusion, like a body dysmorphia. It can help her shift into a healthier psychology.
Yeah.
Again, by thinking about these associations. So a lot of ways, when you're pointing the hypnosis tool on yourself, a lot of it is probably about managing your delusions.
Interesting. That's a good way to put it.
Maybe eliminating the delusions that are holding you back, and maybe trying to incorporate some delusions that are going to be useful. Across all the different parts of your life. Because a lot of times, I think when people think about hypnosis, they think the hypnotherapist puts them to hypnosis and then tells them, like, you are now going to be a millionaire, right? Or you're not going to have 6-pack abs, something, right? Mm-hmm. What really needs to happen is you need to start associating positive emotions with working out, or you need to start associating positive emotions with coming up with business plans and getting after it, and going and trying to pitch ideas and trying to make sales and that kind of thing, right? That's the thing that gets you to becoming a millionaire. Is, again, shifting the associations and learning to find it fun.
Yeah.
Because then you're going to partake in the behavior over and over again. That's going to lead you closer to whatever that goal is.
Yeah. One of the things that I like to do, just personally, is if I do something, just reward myself at the end. Like if I work out, then always reinforce that with some sort of reward. If it's like eating some chocolate or something, something that I look forward to.
Yeah.
Or being able to relax, or watch my favorite show. I'm not going to do it until I work out, right?
Yeah.
It's like you're constantly associating it with something positive.
Yeah.
So you're replacing all the negative or at least you're balancing things out by having a positive outcome. And
then when you're also doing that, you could also give yourself an internal reward by connecting it to some sort of idea in your mind that gets you pumped up.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, like, if you're a guy and you're working out, it's like, I am now halfway to becoming a Spartan or something. I don't know. Like, so you come up with whatever gives you that like powerful internal motivation. associating to that, because then that helps create that feedback loop long term to just keep going with that behavior.
Interesting.
So hypnosis allows us to both communicate powerfully, if you think about it as vivid descriptive language that steers the imagination and takes people on a journey. It also allows us to potentially manage our own delusions if we start thinking about, using like self-hypnosis to try to address certain topics and maybe change our associations, like, oh, smoking is bad, eating salads is good, making sales phone calls and being excited about going out in the world and trying to be a bit better salesperson or something is good.
Yeah.
Kind of shifting those things around. When using it as a communication tool, there are a number of techniques and ideas that can be kind of played around with. And I think it'd be cool to bring some of them up so these people have like little tools.
Sure.
So we've discussed sensory language in some of the things we're discussing. So like we're talking about like imagining a wave of relaxation coming from the top of your head down to your toes. So that's like a physical sensory thing. Imagining the ocean going around your feet as you stand in the sand, and your feet basically dig into the sand because you've now made it onto a vacation. Imagining biting into a delicious, crisp apple, right? All of a sudden, most times if you do any sort of like taste type description, people will start getting like salivation. Like they're like right away, like
and automatically,
almost automatically.
Yeah.
That's one of the, again, that's the power of kind of this descriptive language.
Got it.
That hypnosis is tapping into. Imagining certain smells, like, well, what is it like to breathe in a rose? Right? All of a sudden, like a lot of people can vividly imagine that, right? And I guess that's probably a lot of times why some people are more hypnotizable than others, is again, how vivid are these things that you're experiencing are.
Yeah, and I'm sure even from your past, like if your childhood, if you associate like a certain smell to your mom or something, or like, a positive experience going to the rose parade. You're at a parade and you smell the roses in the air and you take a deep breath, it'll probably bring them back to a really positive, happy place.
Yeah.
And again, it just automatically, subconsciously, just by the power of description.
Power of descriptive sensory language. One of the common structures that's used when you are doing kind of at least a conversational hypnosis situation, have you ever? Okay. So have you ever been in a situation where maybe you're at a party and you're talking to a person who you just met for the first time? And all of a sudden you realize like, wow, I really feel a strong connection with this person. Like we're standing there, we're bantering, we're talking about movies, and we're talking about music and sports, and the conversation feels so easy. To the point, like as I listen to the sound of this person's voice, the room just melts. And I start thinking about my closest friends and how this person is very much like my closest friends. Like if we were hanging out in a group together, like this, this person fits right in. Right. And then potentially as you're having the conversation, you may be thinking into the future, 6 months from now, you guys going out to dinners and going to parties and like, doing creative projects together, whatever it is. And looking back to this moment as the beginning of that thing. Right. So have you ever, as a structure, allows you to start potentially having somebody access a memory they've had in the past.
Got it.
Right. And then you're able to use kind of descriptive language to kind of describe the experience. Then by having access to certain memories, like bringing up what is it like being with your closest friends, and then associating it to this person, right? All of a sudden now you're able to use the old memories to kind of connect to like this new situation. Then you could use techniques of time dilation.
Okay.
Of, first of all, looking into the future.
Got it.
Right. So let's say you're like doing a I know like car salesmen do this a lot. Mm-hmm. I've noticed car salesmen like they're clearly reading some like conversational hypnosis books where they'll be like trying to sell you like this SUV. Can you imagine 6 months from now, you and your family, you guys are on a road trip. You guys are going through the mountains, surrounded by redwood trees, and you're playing your favorite music, and you're just thinking back to this moment of how good a decision it was to get this car so I can have everyone I care about in one car with me and having the greatest adventure of my life.
So you're basically creating a story, right?
A story. So and here you're creating a thing where you're doing a time dilation, basically saying,
Got
like,
it. Okay, so
you met a person today, and so you're having a conversation with them, and you get them to imagine you 6 months from now.
Yeah.
And what your relationship could be like 6 months from now. So you're actually almost psychologically building in 6 months of a relationship into a relationship that's only been happening for like 2 minutes.
Yeah, I feel like, again, I feel like this technique, this template, this format has been used many times on myself, and I didn't even realize it. But like, when you talk to good salespeople, they do this naturally. Like they'll be like, "Have you ever struggled to find leads for your business?" But they start with "Have you ever?" Right? And so you associate it, and you're like, "Oh my God, yes, I remember that anxiety when I needed more sales to keep my business afloat, and because I didn't have enough leads, I needed more leads." And then they'll bring up some sort of like a memory or something maybe you had when remember that first lead that you got and how excited you were.
Ooh, that's a good one.
And when you got your first sale and you tried like
that just got me. That just got me.
Like
all of a sudden,
like that exhilarating feel. Now imagine 6 months from now after you subscribe to our platform where we'll give you all of these leads for you for a certain price, and you'll have thousands of leads and sales a month, from our services. People have, given me sales pitches like that.
Exactly.
And it works because now that you explain it to me, I'm like, whoa. I've been through that.
It's just, honestly, it's just good writing.
Yeah.
It's using descriptive language. To again, basically create that whole experience where you take a person on an entire journey of like, even when you're talking about something that happened 6 months from now, all of a sudden your brain's like, wait a minute, like now I'm in my mind, I've now had this relationship almost for 6 months, even though you've only known a person for a couple of minutes. Well, I really like the one we were talking about, like, that first time you get your first like lead or whatever it is, and that excitement, taking the person back to that excitement. Like that's a useful technique. And so the takeaway is you can be using language like "have you ever," "imagine," this time dilation, this the description of the different sensory modalities, whether it's taste, physical feeling, hearing, visual senses, and to direct somebody to a particular emotional state. And when you direct them to that emotional state, in certain emotional states, you're more likely to behave a particular way than others.
Wow.
And
That's
that
amazing.
allows you to basically, as a tool of influence and manipulation, to be able to really shift people.
It's so simple.
Yeah. And so obviously you can lay it on really thick, like in the examples we were giving. But in most normal communication, just becoming a little bit more aware of when you're discussing certain topics, how much are you taking people into this world of imagination, and just like peppering it in here and there, would just make your communication more interesting, potentially more exciting for people to listen to you. Right? Because instead of just giving the facts, you paint the picture, and all of a sudden people are now going on a journey with you in this, in whatever story you're telling. And that way, this applies to just, again, your interpersonal conversations, as well as it applies to whatever your pitch is whenever you're like doing an advertising campaign. Is again, just connecting to this description, this really cool power that a lot of people, when you describe experiences of them, will in some way go through that experience.
And it ties so well into marketing, branding, self-improvement, sales, like every aspect, conversations, like interpersonal relationships. I feel like it's such a useful thing. Just be aware. Being aware of these things is so helpful, and that's what I've learned. It's just being aware of like all these different kind of ideas and techniques of how, just the fact that how we're so easily influenced and manipulated sometimes without our even understanding of it. But once we understand it, it's very eye-opening.
Yeah, but it's also really cool, like, going, especially if you're doing like a self-hypnosis situations and you're listening to a really well-constructed hypnosis script, it's a joy, especially if you're using it to like address things like if you're using it to just achieve a deeper state of relaxation because you're dealing with stress, or if you're using it to try to maybe address, questions of like confidence and social anxiety, or focus and productivity. It's a joy to be able to like have this thing where we have this like inner movie screen in our minds, and somebody's able to describe an experience and we're able to go into it. It's very cool.
Again, just subconsciously, just the whole idea of like it just triggers physical responses just by listening to someone say something. It's so amazing, so powerful. Well, anyways, Gene, I think that concludes our podcast.
Probably, yeah.
There's so much we could probably talk about.
Yeah, I was originally I was trying to figure out how to go into this topic because it's so big. And I was like, originally, we're going to talk about the history of hypnosis. I'm like, I don't know. Are we going to talk about we mentioned some of the, at least the techniques, so like the way you can structure certain language patterns, but we can go into a lot deeper. But I thought the bigger overview of this idea of the fact that descriptive language can shift us around is a good starting point.
Yeah.
And I think at some point we might circle back more on this topic, because there's a lot of stuff that, again, you can learn from hypnosis and apply to just general communication.
Oh, absolutely. This was a very good little introduction for me, just learning and hearing about this from you. So thank you again, Gene.
Sure.
Thank you guys for listening to Manipulation Games, Psychology and Marketing Podcast. I like these topics where we kind of touch a bit of psychology, but also marketing, because they're so tied in together. The fact that we're kind of bridging the gap, I think, is one of the cool aspects of our podcast, which is, I think, very unique. And I don't think a lot of other people do that, or focus on it as much as we do. So I hope you guys enjoyed listening to our podcast about hypnosis. Leave a comment. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Darren, and this is...
I'm Gene.
Thank you again. We're powered by Invoice Media.
Voice your passion,
guys. We'll see you next time. Bye.